Okay, everybody, this is Dr. Jenkins. Welcome back. Here is our video that we're going to finish out the digestive system. All right, so we're going to pick up where we left off. We finished with our discussion of the large intestine anatomy, and you've had a chance in lab to review some of these also. So you're going to remember the regions of the large intestine. The beginning region is called the cecum, ascending colon, transverse colon, descending colon, sigmoid colon, and then of course the rectum, and then the exit chute is the anus. We ended identifying the two sphincters, the thickened muscular areas around the anus. Remember, the internal anal sphincter is closer to the opening and it is made up of smooth muscle, whereas the external anal sphincter is skeletal muscle, external anal sphincter, skeletal muscle, so that we can voluntarily release the poop. Lastly, we talked about some more specific anatomy, on the large intestine. The ribbon of muscle that runs along the middle is called the tinea coli. And when that constricts, it forms these pouches, and the pouches are called haustra. And I gave the analogy of the drawstring on the hoodie. All right, so let's just pick up where we left off. What I want to point out is the inner lining of the large intestine is smooth. This is different from the small intestine. The large intestine does not have villi and microvilli. The small intestine has the villi for more surface area, but the large intestine does not have villi, and therefore its inner lining is smooth. All the rest here is extra. Let's talk about the large intestine function. The two that I'm going to ask you. The large intestine functions to reabsorb water and forms the poop, which should not be surprising to you. There is some absorption of vitamins, but you do not need to know that. Excuse me. So the two functions you need to know, reabsorption of water. Remember that along the way, we added a lot of juices to help with digestion. We added saliva in the mouth. We added hydrochloric acid and other juices in the stomach. We added even more fluid in the large intestine. So your body doesn't want to waste all that water. So instead of just pooping out all that water, the body reabsorbs it back into the bloodstream. You don't need to know the amount, but just know that one big function of the large intestine is to reabsorb all that water. Now, truth be told, we do reabsorb water in the small intestine too. So we also reabsorb water in the small intestine. But I'm picking it out here as one specific function to the large intestine. And then, of course, the large intestine functions to form the poop. So anything that was non-digestible, anything that is waste, gets formed into neatly formed little logs, for lack of a better word. I'm going to blow my nose for 1 second. I'm so sorry. It's the allergies. All right. And then the last thing to point out about the large intestine, this is where the movement of things through it is the slowest. So things move quickly from the mouth to the esophagus. We know that. Things move more slowly through the stomach and the small intestine. As we get to the large intestine, movement is very slow. This is the place where the food or foodstuff or what's left will spend the longest. Okay. You don't need to know these numbers. They're just there, FYI. And again, I apologize for these random blocks. There's some kind of formatting thing when I bring them over to the iPad. You don't need to know any more specifics about the process of pooping. It's there for you. I do like to have a little bit of fun. This is actually a medical tool, the Bristol stool chart. So let me ask you, which type poop do you think is the healthiest. I may have done this in lecture, I can't remember. According to the Bristol stool chart, types 3 or 4 would be normal. They're kind of fun to read out. Like a sausage, but with cracks on its surface. Like a sausage or snake, smooth and soft, haha. But just like our furry friends, our dogs and our cats, we can tell a lot about the health of our body and our gut by the poop coming out of it. It should look like type 3 or 4. Ha ha ha. While we're here, and again, I can't remember if I talked about this in lecture, so if I did, I apologize, but I want to make sure I'm covering what I need to. I'm not going to ask you to know many abnormalities, but I do want to point out too, if we're on this end of the Bristol stool chart, it's probably more a case of constipation. I know, not fun to talk about. And then once we go on this end, not surprisingly, we're talking about diarrhea. I bring this up because I want to relate it to the function of the large intestine. If we are up here, if our poop is too hard, what's happening? Constipation, you can't poop. So for some reason, the body is holding on too long to these things moving through the large intestine. I'm just going to say material spends too long in large intestine. So if stuff is spending too long in large intestine, if the transit time is even slower, what's happening is too much is being reabsorbed. If things spend too long in the large intestine, it gives extra time to reabsorb water. And that's why the poop gets firmer, because it spends too long. On the other hand, in the diarrhea, material moves too quickly. I usually give the example because right up by campus is Taco Bell. If I dare ingested Taco Bell, because I haven't had it in so long, my body would probably want to push the food out more quickly than normal. So when your body is attempting to push things out more quickly than normal, whether it's an irritant in the food, whether you're sick and there's a virus or bacteria and your body's trying to purposely get rid of it, if things move too quickly through the large intestine, there's not enough time to reabsorb that water. So instead of reabsorbing that water, you poop it out. And that's why the poop is more watery. Now, of course, that's a bad thing. If our poop is too watery, and instead of being able to reabsorb it and reuse it, if we poop it out, the body can't use it. And it can absolutely lead to dehydration because you're pooping out what would normally be reabsorbed. Sorry, my cat's having a field day right now on the couch. All right. Let's now focus on the accessory organs. So remember, the GI tract is what food passes through. Mouth, oropharynx, esophagus, stomach, small intestine, large intestine, rectum, anus. And then, sitting outside the digestive tract are the accessory organs. Pancreas, liver, and gallbladder are our biggest. So food does not directly pass through these. However, they still play an important role. I'm going to let you spend time with the anatomy in lab and on your own. What I want to focus on here is function. So here's our pancreas. It's the yellowish, oblong shaped thing with the lobules, kind of has that scaly look to it. The pancreas functions in two systems. It is an exocrine gland in the digestive, and it is also in the endocrine gland. So here's an organ that functions in two body systems. It functions in the, I don't know why this is not working. Let's go to blue. I think my pen battery just died. So I'm just gonna have to talk through the rest, folks. Let me see if I can plug this in while I'm talking to charge the pen. So just have a listen, and I'm gonna charge this in a moment. All right, so the pancreas is both a digestive organ and an endocrine organ. So here's the digestive organ part and the endocrine organ part. For the digestive part, what you need to know is it secretes enzymes. The digestive function of the pancreas is that it secretes enzymes. You don't have to know what those enzymes are, but just know the overall function of the pancreas. It produces enzymes. Remember, in order to do chemical digestion, we need to have enzymes. So many of our many of our enzymes that help do chemical digestion are produced in the pancreas. We remember that all these accessory organs empty their secretions into the beginning of the large intestine, which is the duodenum. Excellent. Alrighty. I'm going to plug this pen in while I'm talking. I'm going to multitask. Everything's going to be great. You can see a side note there. Oh, I got the wrong... I think I got the wrong charger. I'm going to have to go back downstairs. You can see another side note there. These enzymes are only activated once they reach the small intestine, so they're not really active in the pancreas. Okay, I'm going to go grab the other charger. Just going to pause for 1 minute. I'll be right back. All right, folks, thanks for being patient. Still recording. Now I'm going to plug in the pen. I definitely should have planned a little better. All right, so you only need to know the digestive function, produces enzymes. There is an endocrine function. The pancreas also produces hormones. And the two hormones that it produces are insulin and glucagon. Insulin is released when blood sugar is high. Glucagon is released when blood sugar is low. So these are two hormones. I'm sure you've heard of insulin. Well, insulin and glucagon are two hormones that are responsible for blood sugar regulation. They're produced by the pancreas. They actually leave the pancreas and go on to the liver where they have their actual function. But let's just start with the basics because we're going to have a chapter later on the endocrine system. You just need to know the pancreas also produces hormones. Two of those hormones are insulin and glucagon. You just need to know insulin is released when blood sugar is too high, and glucagon is released when blood sugar is too low. That's it for now. If you wanted more information on the microscopic anatomy of the pancreas, here it is. You do not need to know this for this class. If you were curious, as an aside, the acinar cells, the ones on this picture, look a little bit more orangish or reddish, salmon color, if you will. The acinar cells are the ones that produce the digestive enzymes, whereas the cells of the pancreas that produce the hormones are called pancreatic islets. You don't need to know these. You don't need to know all the specifics about these pancreatic enzymes. I do want to point out one thing. The pancreatic enzymes collectively are alkaline. and that's important. Remember, coming from the stomach, the fluid, the chyme, is very acidic. Remember, the stomach is so acidic. So the pancreas, therefore, when it secretes its enzymes into the duodenum, they're going to be alkaline to help balance out all the acid from the stomach. Now, in general, I am going to ask you to know the basic enzyme that helps to chemically digest each specific nutrient. So, make sure you're paying attention here. Most of this is in red. For the enzymes, usually an enzyme ends in the suffix ase, protease, amylase, lipase. So when you see a word that ends in the suffix ase, you are automatically going to think enzyme. The enzyme that helps to chemically break down protein is protease. Folks, use the words to help you. ACE tells me it's an enzyme. Protease, protein. So protease is an example of an enzyme that helps to break down protein. Amylase. For this one, you don't necessarily have to add pancreatic. Amylase is what helps to break down starch. And then lipase is what helps to break down fat. Lipids, lipase, fat should make sense. All right. The liver, I'm going to let you look over the anatomy on your own. There's 4 lobes, right, left, caudate, quadrate. I was telling my class, if you have me for lab on Fridays, that for some reason I've always remembered the quadrate because it's right next to the gallbladder, GQ. I'm going to try my pen here. Oh, it's coming around. So for some reason I've always remembered that the quadrate lobe, doesn't want to work. The quadrate lobe is the lobe right by the gallbladder. So for some reason, I've always remembered GQ, like the old magazine. And then the other small lobe is the caudate. And then, of course, there would be right and left. Make sure you review the other ligaments. I always remembered falciform as being more on the front. So the falciform ligament is, we tend to identify the falciform ligament as being more on the front. So I think about F for front. So falciform is more of the ligament on the front. It can be a little confusing with these pictures, so that's why I'm trying to clarify it. Falciform ligament is on the front. Versus on the back, we have the round ligament, and it is really bright white. So on the back is more of the round ligament, and it is on the back, but it's also really bright white. So I would try and memorize these as falciform ligament. Falciform ligament separates the right and left lobe on the front. Falciform ligament separates the right and left lobe on the front. Falciform, F for front. The round ligament tends to be more viewable on the back. Round ligament on the back. And then it does dangle down. It's really thick white. You do not need to know the microscopic anatomy. If you're interested, once you look up close, the functional unit of the liver is called a hepatic lobule, and it kind of has a stop sign shape, a little bit more flattened. So the liver is just basically these crunched together microscopic lobules, but look at how vascular they are. Indeed, one of the functions of the liver is filters blood. So wouldn't it make sense if one of the functions of the liver is to filter the blood, that we have a lot of blood supply going through the liver? But this is all extra. All extra. If you're interested, at the corner of each hepatic lobule, would be a triad of blood vessels and lymphatics at every corner. There's a central vein in the middle. But this is all extra. Here's what it looks like actually under a microscope. We can see, this is kind of what we can see of a hepatic lobule. It would continue up here. We just can't see all of it. And this would be the triad of vessels at each corner. But you don't need to know that. What I want to do is I want to break the liver down into 3 functions. Blood filtration, produces bile, and what I'm calling metabolic regulation. Let's start with this function. So the digestive function of the liver is that it produces bile. Bile is needed to break down fat. My pen doesn't want to work as well, so I need to charge it. So you're going to have to listen. That's okay, though. The digestive function of the liver is that it produces bile. Bile helps to break down fat. Nothing else, not protein, not carbohydrates. Bile is needed to break down fat. So one function of the liver produces bile, needed to break down fat. Number 2 function of the liver, filters blood. Number 2 function of the liver, filters blood. Now, once we start to be able to put everything together, what we see is the blood in our body gets filtered multiple times. The blood gets filtered in the liver, the blood gets filtered in the pancreas, the blood gets filtered in the spleen. But each organ that filters the blood tends to filter out different things. So for example, the spleen tends to filter out, and this is all extra for the most part, the spleen filters out dead red blood cells. The spleen, when it filters, can activate the immune response when needed. The kidneys filter out some drug metabolites. The kidneys filter out protein breakdown products. So the blood gets filtered again and again, and each different organ has its own thing that it tends to focus on. The liver can filter out alcohol. The liver can filter out certain metabolites, but each one kind of has its own area. For now, let's just keep it simple. The liver produces bile, which is needed to break down fat, and the liver filters blood. The third function, here it's titled metabolic regulation. But I have in red what's most important. But let me start with this one. That's about all my, oh, there it goes. So we're going to focus on those 2. In order to understand this, the first thing you need to know is after nutrients have been absorbed through the small intestine wall into the blood. Remember, what organ does absorption of carbs, fat, and protein? Small intestine. Well, check it out. After absorption through the small intestine wall into the bloodstream, where does that nutrient-rich blood go? Liver. Always, always, always. You need to know that first. After nutrients are absorbed through the small intestine wall into the bloodstream, where do they go? Liver. By the way, they get there through the hepatic portal vein. We talked about a portal system at the beginning of the semester where there's a series of 2 capillary beds instead of 1. But that's extra. So first thing to know is after nutrients are absorbed through the small intestine wall into the bloodstream, where does that nutrient-rich blood go? Liver, always. So here we see the liver is receiving all the nutrient-rich blood. But the liver, we don't need to keep all of those nutrients in the blood at once. If you just have a big meal, do you need to keep all those nutrients that you just absorbed into the blood? Of course not. So what the liver does is it's going to be receiving that nutrient-rich blood from the small intestine, And the liver is going to decide what to store, what nutrients to store for later versus what nutrients to keep in the blood. This is hugely important. We constantly need to leave just the right amount in the blood. And this is also going to explain why, if you don't eat for a couple hours, no biggie. If you haven't eaten for a couple of hours, well, what do? Your liver will release some of those stored nutrients. Okay. Good stuff, folks. All the extra here, like bile. Remember, bile is needed to break down fat. The fancy word for helping to break down fat is emulsify. We don't need to know that necessarily. Just know that bile is needed to break down or emulsify, break down fats. Okay, the gallbladder. The gallbladder stores bile. Please ignore all these other arrows and brackets. But I'm telling you what you need to know. The liver produces bile and the gallbladder stores bile. We remember that the cystic duct is the duct that transports bile out of the gallbladder. And if you have a gallbladder stone or gallbladder problems and they're that bad, they'll just go in and they'll take the gallbladder out. If the gallbladder is removed, then the liver would just take over some of that storage duties for bile. Okay, I did discuss the main bile, the main ducts, so please make sure you review those. All right. Now, to end this chapter, there really isn't going to be that much more. We're going to tend to keep it simple. Overall regulation of the digestive system. Here's what you need to know. The digestive system is regulated by the nervous system and by the endocrine system. Remember, the endocrine system releases hormones. So the digestive system is going to be overseen by nerve impulses, nervous system, and hormones. We're not going to get that specific. You don't need to know all these specific things. Let me point out exactly what you need to know. What I would like you to know about the nervous system. The nervous system, I'd like you to know our main parasympathetic nerve, which is the vagus nerve. Folks, I know you remember from A&P1, sympathetic and parasympathetic. When we're in a parasympathetic state, the body has a lower heart rate and blood pressure and respiratory rate, lower heart rate. But this is when we have more activity in our GI tract and kidneys. So whenever we have activity in the vagus nerve is our main parasympathetic nerve, parasympathetic. And that will increase activity in the GI tract. So behind the scenes, what's telling the GI tract work more, or digest less? Well, one example would be nerves. Which nerves? The parasympathetic nerves, because parasympathetic is when we lower our heart rate and we are allowed more energy to give towards our gut. The main parasympathetic nerve that goes throughout our body, including our GI tract, is the vagus nerve. Everything else here is extra. Let me point out some hormones that I would like you to know. Here's where I would ask more of the nursing students, but a little bit less for you. I want to talk about 2 hormones that affect our appetite. So just make sure you review these bottom 2. So in addition to nerve impulses, another thing that helps regulate our GI tract are hormones in our gut. Leptin is a hormone that reduces our appetite. Ghrelin is a hormone that tells us to eat. It increases our appetite. The way that I remember this is ghrelin reminds me of a growl, And if I have an appetite, my stomach might growl. That's how I remember that. So these are two hormones that affect our appetite. Ghrelin increases your appetite, and then the hormone leptin reduces appetite. Everything else here for now is extra. You do not need to know about these gastric phases. You don't need to know them. Look at how nice I'm being. You don't even have to know cholecystokinin. Don't even worry about vomiting. Okay, last topic. We're going to end this out. Here we go. This last part looks at how is the digestion of carbohydrates different from the digestion of fats and the digestion of proteins. So now that we've identified the main digestion process, now we're going to go back and just briefly touch upon, well, are there any differences between this digestive process for carbs or fat or protein? Here we go. For carbohydrates, we're going to remember we can already begin to do some chemical digestion in the mouth. So one of the things that is unique about carbohydrates is we can begin chemical digestion of starch in the mouth. Only starch in the mouth. What's something else that is unique about carbohydrates? They are the fastest. They go through this process the fastest. Everything else here is extra. This gives you more information about how specifically we absorb in the small intestine. Don't worry about it. Let's switch over to protein. What are some of the things that are unique about protein? Well, we said that we can do, I think it likes the blue. Let's try the green. Well, I guess my pen's not charged enough. So I'm just gonna have to say it out loud, but that's okay. So what are some of the things that are unique about protein? We can begin chemical digestion of protein in the stomach. This is a review, we already talked about it, right? What is something that's unique about protein? We can begin chemical digestion of protein in the stomach. The other thing I want to point out about protein, its digestion and absorption takes longer. Carbohydrates are the fastest to be digested and absorbed. Protein takes longer. There are some extra things, okay. What is unique about fat? Well, let me just tell you what you need to know. Fat takes longer to digest. So on balance, carbohydrates are the fastest. Carbohydrates are quick. Protein and fat take longer. Simple, right? Carbohydrates are quick, protein and fat take longer. Some of the other things, carbohydrates, because it can be digested and absorbed so quickly, carbs give us the quickest energy. Fat takes longer to digest, but once we do digest and absorb it and then use it for energy, fat gives us the most energy per gram. Fat gives us the most energy per gram. You do not need to know all of these specifics. I do want to remind you something we already discussed, something else unique about fats. In the small intestine wall, they get absorbed into the lacteals. Does that sound familiar? Remember I drew a picture poorly on the board? Carbs and protein are absorbed through the small intestine wall into the bloodstream. But fats are different. Fats are absorbed into those green lymphatic vessels called lacteals, which will eventually make its way to the bloodstream. All right. The last thing I want to point out about fat is not water soluble. That means that once we get fat to the bloodstream, it cannot dissolve in the water of the bloodstream. It's not water soluble. So fat needs a transporter. It needs a carrier/transporter. Fat needs a little transporter in the blood. What are those transporters? lipoproteins. Lipoproteins are the transporters for fat. Now, you don't need to know the specifics, high density, low density, or very low density. These may sound familiar to you if you've ever had or know someone who's had a blood test testing cholesterol. Cholesterol is made up of our HDLs and LDLs, our high density lipoproteins and low density lipoproteins. Well, their function in the body, we actually need some of them. We just need the right ratio, by the way. These lipoproteins are what help us transport fat in the bloodstream. All the rest is extra. You don't need to know the specifics for each type of lipoprotein. Okay, if you were looking at this, I'm not going to ask you this, but there's a typo, so I want to make sure that I'm giving you the proper information. Again, you don't need to know this for a test, but if you're reading through it, cholesterol should be less than 200 milligrams. 300 was a typo, but not on the test. Folks, we're on the last slide. Here we go. When it talks about vitamins and minerals, they can be a little bit different too. Vitamins, for example, it's in green, you need to know it. Vitamins are absorbed unchanged. What that means is they don't have to be digested. You bring in vitamin C in your orange juice, your body doesn't have to break down that vitamin C into any smaller parts. Your body is able to absorb that vitamin C in the same form that you ingested it in the orange juice. All right. Thanks for bearing with me with my whole pen situation. I will do a better job next time. Please focus only on what you need to know. All right. Nice job, folks.